Now it's time for you to build your own float layout in order to practice everything that we have learned in this section so far. And once again, in this section, we will keep working on this shoe example here. And so this is how we left it after the last challenge. And so, as always, please use that as a starting point. And if you don't have the code, then just get it from a link that I will place in this lecture. Okay, but anyway, after building our float layout here, this is what our component is supposed to be looking like. Now, the very first thing that you should probably do is to activate that box sizing trick, so what we learned in the last lecture. And then from there, you can start using floats. For example, in order to place this free shipping label here at the right side, so right beside this price here. Then down here, as for these colors, here we actually don't need to use floats because we already solved this problem before in another challenge. So we used inline blocks to place these colors here all side by side. Remember that? And so there's no need to change that now. And then finally, the biggest part of this challenge is to create this layout where these three parts are side by side. So what I want you to do is to create one container which will contain this image, then which will contain one element which contains all of this, and then one element which contains all of this. So right now I think all of this content here is simply one after another without any separation. So without being in separate boxes, right? Yeah, so that's the case. But right now, what I need you to do is to put these two here in one box and these, so all of these here in another box, so that you can then put them side by side, just like we have it here. All right. So again, all of this here should be in one container element, and then as child elements, there should be this image, then a div, so a box which contains all of this, and then another div which contains these two. Then between these elements here, we have 40 pixels of space, so here and here, and then based on that, you will need to figure out the width of both these elements here. So this one and this one. And if that sounds too hard or too confusing, then don't worry. You can just use a width of 240 pixels, and I will then explain you how I calculated the exact width for each of the boxes. Okay, and I think that's it for the instructions that you need for this challenge. And maybe you can write them down to make it a bit easier for you to follow them. Because actually there's a lot to do here, and so this really is a real challenge for you. So once again, don't worry if you are not able to complete it 100%. All that matters is that you write at least some of the code on your own and that you try it. Okay? So take all the time that you need and then just come back here to the video to see my solution. So, how did you do? Hopefully you did at least part of this challenge, and so let's get started. So as I said, the first thing I'm going to do is to fix the box model by saying box sizing border box, of course. And then let's start by working with these two elements here to put them side by side. So that's the price and the shipping. So that's easy enough. So float left, so not keft, obviously. And then here float right. Okay. So that doesn't look right somehow. And so the reason for that is that now this image is bigger, and so it is floating around it as well. So probably what we should do now already is to put all the content here inside that container that I mentioned. So everything that comes after this image should be in a new div, which I'm calling here the product info. Okay, so we open that here, and then we want everything in there until the end of the colors. So here we close it. And again, unfortunately, CodePen does not automatically do the formatting for us. But let's just leave it like this. We don't need to worry too much about this small example. So anyway, I will now put this other content, so these two here, inside of another div, just as I told you to do in the instructions part. And this one I'm calling the product details. Okay, and then close it right here after this UL and before the button. And so now each of them is in its own box. So we fixed that problem that the image is no longer between these two pieces of content, but we still have a problem, which is that now this paragraph here is floating around, or basically in between now, these two pieces of content, right? And so what we can do is to take a look at this element, so which is this one, the product description, and then clear the float right there. So where is that? Let's see. Well, I think I actually hadn't used this yet. So let's paste it up here. And let's say clear both. And there you go. That fixes that floating problem, right? So whenever you have a problem with floats, with some elements placing itself where you don't want it to be, then you can simply clear the floats like this. Now, another solution would have been to wrap these two elements here inside of another container element, and then we could have added the clearfix class to that container. So that clearfix hack that I showed you a bit earlier, that we will actually also need for something in a second. But anyway, this is now done. And so let's now worry about the overall layout here. So the elements that participate in the layout are, of course, these three boxes. So this image, this box that we just created, and this one. Right? So that's the image, that's the product info. So let's put that here right at the top of the product information. And then also the product details. And so let's put that here close to the details. Okay. And so, as I was saying, the first thing that we need to do is to determine a width for these elements. All right. So let's do that. And I will add a comment here so that I can show you the math that is happening. So the total width of this container is 825, right? And it also has a border of 4 on each side. So the math here is 280 pixels minus 8, which are the two borders on each side. Then minus 250, which is the width of this image. So where is that? Let's see. It doesn't seem to be somewhere here. Yeah, actually we set that height and width right here. So that's why I couldn't see it, but yeah, I knew it was 250. So we need to subtract that as well from the total. So that's not 280, that's 825. So don't know where that came from. And then remember how I said that we want 40 pixels right here and right here. And so that is also space that we cannot use for the columns. So we need to subtract that as well. So minus 80. So basically the result of this calculation here will be the exact amount of space that we have remaining to fill up with the columns. So I will just do the math here using this functionality on the Mac, but you can just do it any other way. So 850 minus 8 minus 250 minus 80. So that is the total width that is available for the two columns, but we have two of them. And so we need to divide all of this by 2. So wrap it in parentheses, divide by 2. And so the result is 243.5 pixels. So let's not use the point, and let's just use 443 pixels. So with 243 pixels. So divided by 2. Then let's put the same on the other column here. So that's this one. Okay, so that worked. And now all we have to do is to float all of these three elements. So first the image, which actually we haven't selected yet. So let's give it a class of product image. And let's put that somewhere here, maybe. Well, actually not. Let's put it actually outside here. So the height and width we don't need to define using CSS because that's already in here. But let us define the float and float it to the left. And now the same with all the other ones. So float to the left and like this. And let's copy this simply for the other one and float left as well. All right, so that looks nice already. Now we just need to add those 40 pixels of spacing that we wanted. So let's use margin for that. So I will just add a margin right on the image and on this element right here. So margin right 40 pixels. And then also on this one. And with that, well, we are looking pretty close already to our final layout, right? Let's just add some like cosmetic details here. So adding some padding here to the top of this one. So padding 40 pixels, let's say. Well, that's a bit too much. Okay. And now I'm noticing that these colors somehow no longer fit down here. So let's see why that might be. Well, maybe we need to decrease the space a little bit between them. Or actually, I did a mistake here. So I added the padding to all the sides, and so therefore is now all too small. So I just wanted a padding top of 20 pixels. Yeah, and now that looks a lot better, of course. Now next up, let's add some margin here to this free shipping label. So to kind of manually align it to this value here. So margin top, let's say 8 pixels. And by the way, all of these things, like manually aligning elements like this, will all be a thing of the past once we start using Flexbox. Okay, so Flexbox will be so helpful, it's gonna be incredible. We will not have to do any of these like guessing numbers to align vertically. We also will not have to do manual calculations of width like this. So all of this will be automatically figured out by Flexbox in the future. So that's going to be so helpful, and I can't wait to show it to you actually. Now let's just add some space here to this paragraph. So let's see if I have already selected that. Yeah, here it is. So let's say margin bottom of 10 pixels right there. And then finally, let's fix the spacing here a little bit. So here is a lot more spacing than here. And that's because we still have that margin top on the product details. So let's fix that. So on this product details title. So this is the one I mean. So let's get rid of that. And let's instead add a margin to the top of 20 pixels like we did here in this other one. Actually, here I think we used padding, but margin is better, of course. So let's go back also to this other box. And yeah, so instead of padding, let's use margin here. And so that looks the same. And with this, we are actually finished. So that looks just like this. And so, challenge completed successfully. Now, there are some things that we could have done a bit differently. So for example, I told you that we would need the ClearFix class, but actually we ended up not needing it. So what we could have done would have been to wrap these three elements here into a container. And actually that's what I told you to do, right? So, well, why not then just do that? So that's not too hard. So let's do that here. A div with the class of container. And then we need to close it right at the very end before this button. All right. So let's select that container here to give it a background color. Okay. And now you see that the color is actually nowhere to be seen. So in order to figure out why that is, let's inspect this. So we have the article, and then in there is the H2, and then there is the container. But now you see that this container has a height of 0. So why do you think that is? Well, once again, it's because of collapsed heights. So this element technically has no height because all of its child elements are floated, right? So the child elements are these three. So the image, it is the product info and the product details. And so remember how we floated all of these three elements. And so that means that the container right now has no element that is not floated. And so therefore its height collapsed. Okay, and if for some reason we really needed to fix that, then we could use a ClearFix class for that. So again, this does not need to be called ClearFix, but this is just a general name that is used. So content is nothing. Display is block. And of course, finally, clear is set to both. And let's wait for it. Of course, we also need to add it here to this element. ClearFix. And yeah, so now that turned red, which means that the container is back to having a height. Okay. And let's comment that out here. And so, yeah, now that's really it. But again, it actually also worked without this container element because we had all of the space here nicely divided up. So we said exactly how wide each of these elements here should be. And so therefore, there was no space for any of the next elements, in this case, the button, to float around them. Okay. But again, I'm sure that sounds a bit confusing. And the reason for that is that I'm not going super deep into how floats and clears actually work, because for the rest of the course, we will now replace them with Flexbox and CSS Grid, which make all of this a lot easier, trust me. So if you're excited about that, then don't wait and let's move right to our next lecture here,